The smartest people you know are not smarter because they know more. They are smarter because they think differently. They have built mental habits that most people never acquire. Not because those habits are difficult, but because nobody ever showed them what those habits look like. This is that. 1. First principles thinking. Most people reason from analogy. They see what exists, assume it is the best available version of reality, and work within its constraints. First principles thinking breaks everything down to its most fundamental truths and builds back up from there. Elon Musk famously used it to redesign rocket manufacturing by asking not what rockets cost, but what the raw materials cost. The gap between those two numbers was where everyone else's assumptions had been living. 2. Inversion. Instead of asking how to achieve your goal, ask how to guarantee its failure. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's partner at Berkshire Hathaway, called inversion one of the most powerful tools in his intellectual toolkit. If you want a good marriage, ask what destroys marriages. If you want a successful business, ask what causes businesses to fail. The obstacles become visible when you approach the problem from the wrong direction. 3. Second-order thinking. Every decision has a first-order consequence and a second-order consequence. Most people stop at the first. Psychologist Philip Tetlock, whose research on expert prediction has transformed how governments and organizations make decisions, found that the people who predict the future most accurately are the ones who ask not just what will happen, but what happens because of what happens. Think one more level, then one more after that. 4. The map is not the territory. This comes from philosopher Alfred Korzybski, and it is one of the most practically useful ideas ever articulated. Every model, every belief, every mental framework you have is a map. Reality is the territory. The map is always a simplification. Knowing this keeps you from confusing your interpretation of reality with reality itself, which is one of the most common and costly errors a mind can make. 5. Bayesian Updating. Your beliefs should not be fixed. They should be probabilities that update as new evidence arrives. Statistician Thomas Bayes developed the mathematical framework, but the principle is simpler than the math. When new information arrives that conflicts with what you believe, do not defend your current belief. Adjust it. The smarter you become, the lighter your grip on any given conclusion. 6. Occam's razor. When two explanations fit the available evidence, prefer the simpler one. Not because simple explanations are always right, but because complexity that is not required by the evidence is usually the product of assumption, not fact. This keeps your thinking clean. It prevents you from building elaborate theories on top of insufficient data. 7. The availability heuristic and how to fight it. Your brain judges how likely something is by how easily an example comes to mind. This is why people overestimate the risk of plane crashes and underestimate the risk of driving. Psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky documented this bias extensively and showed that almost everyone is subject to it. Knowing it exists is the first step to correcting for it. When something feels obviously true because you can easily imagine it, ask whether it is actually probable or merely vivid. 8. Thinking in systems. Nothing exists in isolation. Every action ripples outward into a system. Systems thinker Donella Meadows spent her career showing that the most common reason intelligent people produce bad outcomes is that they intervene in systems without understanding the feedback loops those systems contain. When you change one variable, something downstream changes. Something after that changes too. Mapping the system before you touch it is not slowness. It is intelligence. 9. Steel manning. Most people practice straw manning. They take the weakest version of an opposing argument and defeat it easily. Steel manning does the opposite. You reconstruct the strongest possible version of the argument you disagree with. If you cannot do this, you do not yet understand the disagreement well enough to have an opinion on it. The people who are best at changing their minds are the ones who take the opposing view most seriously. 10. Separating the signal from the noise. Most information is noise. Most data is noise. Most of what arrives in your attention on any given day is noise. The signal is the small fraction of incoming information that actually updates your model of reality in a meaningful way. Statistician Nate Silver, whose forecasting work on elections and sports has beaten expert consensus repeatedly, argues that the single most important intellectual skill is knowing which data points actually matter and which ones just feel like they matter. 11. The paradox of expertise. The more expert you become in a field, the harder it is to think outside its established frameworks. Psychologist Linus won 2 Nobel Prizes and spent the last decades of his career convinced that vitamin C cured everything. Expertise creates depth, but it also creates blindness. The antidote is to keep some portion of your thinking permanently in beginner's mind. Curious, undefended, willing to be wrong about what you thought you knew. 12. Holding multiple hypotheses simultaneously. The worst thinkers commit to a single explanation early and then seek evidence that confirms it. The best thinkers generate multiple competing hypotheses and hold them all as live possibilities until the evidence forces a conclusion. Physicist Richard Feynman described this as his primary method. You keep asking which of these explanations fits all the data, not just the data you already found. These are not 12 things to memorize. They are 12 ways to move through the world. A mind that uses even a few of them consistently will see what others miss, avoid errors others walk into repeatedly, and change its conclusions as the evidence requires, which is the only definition of intelligence that matters when reality actually changes. You are not smarter or less smart than you think. You are the product of the thinking habits you have built. And habits, unlike intelligence, are a choice.